Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed and like. A quiet strangeness settles in long before most Americans realize what feels different. Daily life in the UK moves according to an older rhythm, quieter, slower, threaded with rituals that seem ordinary to locals yet oddly theatrical to outsiders. What stands out first is not the architecture or the accents, but the choreography of everyday habits that operate like an unspoken national code. From the way people queue with almost ceremonial patience to the instinctive politeness woven into even the briefest exchanges, the cultural texture feels both familiar and foreign at the same time. Many Americans notice how the pace of life rarely rushes to match their own. Trains arrive and depart with a kind of resigned efficiency, and commuters accept delays with a calm that feels almost unreal. Streets tend to hum rather than roar. Conversations in cafes drift at lower volumes. Even busy neighborhoods carry a surprising softness. There is a subtle emotional climate that leans toward understatement, where excess enthusiasm is carefully trimmed and social energy is delivered in measured doses. The atmosphere feels gentler, but also more restrained, as if the culture expects people to limit the footprint of their presence. Small domestic habits often capture American attention as well. The way homes rely on compact appliances, drafty windows, or wall-mounted radiators creates an environment that feels older, more tactile, more aware of energy use. Kettles boil constantly, becoming the anchor of countless daily rituals, while separate hot and cold taps leave many visitors puzzled. Even the simple act of using switches for outlets reflects a philosophy of deliberate consumption, turning things on and off with intention instead of leaving them running. Social behavior carries its own layers of complexity. Indirect communication shapes everything from workplace interactions to simple requests. People apologize preemptively, soften disagreement, and respond to awkwardness with humor sharpened by centuries of self-effacing instinct. Americans often sense an emotional subtlety at play, an expectation to read between the lines rather than rely on explicit statements. Public spaces reinforce this understated personality as well. Noise is tempered, personal space is respected, and even during busy periods, there is a collective effort to maintain a sense of quiet order. In daily encounters, patterns emerge that reveal how deeply cultural habits are rooted. Cashiers chat just enough to be pleasant without crossing into familiarity. Crowds self-organize naturally. People wait without pushing forward, trusting that the system will move them in due time. Weather becomes a universal language, used to navigate social gaps and soften the atmosphere. These rituals form an invisible structure that clarifies how society prefers to function, politely, predictably, and with minimal disruption. Americans observing these habits often recognize how they shape a particular mindset, one that values modesty over display, steadiness over speed, and shared norms over individual convenience. The result is a cultural landscape that feels both calm and carefully balanced, encouraging people to blend into the collective rhythm rather than push against it. The deeper the observation goes, the more these habits reveal a cultural foundation built on continuity rather than reinvention. Many Americans become aware of how strongly the UK leans on tradition in the practical details of life. Tea breaks anchor the workday with predictable pauses, offering moments of calm that contrast sharply with the more fluid, efficiency-driven schedules common in the United States. The midday atmosphere often feels gentler, less pressured, as if the culture collectively acknowledges the value of stepping back rather than pushing harder. Even within homes, routines carry a kind of intentionality. Windows open frequently to let in fresh air despite the lingering chill. Heating is applied sparingly, focused on specific rooms rather than the entire home, reinforcing the idea that comfort comes through adaptability rather than total climate control. Lights are dimmer, interiors cozier, and space is managed thoughtfully. These domestic patterns shape an environment where frugality feels less like cost-saving and more like a respected tradition. In public life, behavioral rituals continue this theme of quiet discipline. Crossing the street becomes an exercise in adapting to a different logic, with traffic patterns challenging the visual instincts Americans rely on. The design of older streets, narrower, curved, and guided by centuries of history, creates a rhythm that prioritizes caution over speed. Pedestrians fall naturally into established patterns, waiting, watching, moving deliberately. The everyday choreography reinforces a mindset of shared responsibility and subtle cooperation. Communication style adds another layer of cultural contrast. Understatement functions almost as a national trait, shaping interactions with a gentle, indirect quality. Americans often notice how humor is used to soften boundaries, how disagreement is wrapped in politeness, and how emotional expression tends to slide beneath the surface rather than burst outward. Even compliments are delivered in a muted register, reflecting a societal expectation that modesty remains intact regardless of the situation. Small symbolic behaviours become shorthand for broader values. People instinctively form cues in situations where Americans might improvise. Umbrellas appear and disappear with quick efficiency as the weather shifts through several moods in a single afternoon. Conversations begin with light remarks about the clouds or drizzle, not as filler, but as a structural part of social etiquette. Pubs transform from historic gathering places during daylight to social anchors at night. Offering a communal warmth built on centuries of routine and repetition, these patterns reveal how daily life creates a psychological landscape distinct from that of the United States. Many Americans find that the British preference for consistency fosters a sense of quiet emotional steadiness. Instead of seeking stimulation through constant change or intensity, the culture invites people to settle into a slower orbit, one shaped by ritual, politeness, and a deep respect for shared norms. Over time, these everyday habits begin to influence how Americans interpret the broader, emotional tone of the UK. Many recognise that the country's rhythms cultivate a particular worldview, one that values subtlety, steadiness, and social harmony over directness or intensity. The preference for understatement encourages people to maintain composure even when frustrations rise. It creates a public environment where emotional restraint is seen not as suppression, but as a form of respect for those around them. As Americans observe longer, a quiet transformation often takes place. The calm predictability of cues, the measured politeness in conversations, and the gentle pace of neighborhood life start to feel less unusual and more grounding. Many find themselves adopting the same habits almost unconsciously. Voice is lower in public. Apologies slip into speech patterns whether necessary or not. The kettle becomes a fixture of comfort. The subtle discipline of switching off outlets or limiting heating turns into a small daily ritual rather than a point of confusion. Even the social landscape reorients their perspective. The cultural emphasis on modesty tempers the instinct to stand out. Casual interactions feel lighter, less performative, shaped by a collective desire to avoid friction. The understated humor, with its dry edges and soft punchlines, begins to make sense in ways it didn't at first. With time, many Americans come to appreciate how this emotional climate fosters stability, how it encourages people to move gently through shared spaces, rather than fill them with urgency or assertiveness. Reflection often arrives quietly. The habits that once seemed strange begin to reveal the values behind them: cooperation, consideration, and a rooted sense of historical continuity. Everyday routines that felt antiquated start to seem intentional, even comforting, offering a subtle reminder that life doesn't always need acceleration to feel meaningful. The British way of navigating daily life creates an atmosphere where routine becomes a source of identity rather than constraint. In the end, what Americans find most striking is how these behaviours influence the feeling of living in the UK. The culture's quiet confidence, its preference for balance over spectacle, and its instinctive politeness shape a world that moves at a different emotional frequency. It encourages reflection, steadiness, and a gentler awareness of others. And in that calm space, many come to understand that the smallest habits often reveal the deepest truths about a society. Those subtle, everyday rituals that define how people connect, communicate, and carry themselves through the world.